We're doing 12 product launches in 12 days. And it's just an insane pace. And we're a startup. So for us to do this, I have to use AI. It's the only way to make it happen. The question is like, to what extent should AI do it?
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Evergrow Show, and today's guest is somebody I am so excited to have on. Kathleen Booth is a battle-tested CMO who has spent the last 2 decades turning fast-growing B2B tech companies into category standouts. After founding and selling one of HubSpot's first partner agencies, Kinten Marketing, Kathleen dove straight into leading high-velocity marketing teams at venture-backed startups such as Attilla Security, Clean.io, and Tradeswell, 2 of which were actually successfully acquired. Following 3 years as SVP of Marketing and Growth at Pavillion, where she guided the brand, demand, and community strategy for a global network of over 10,000 go-to-market leaders, she now leads marketing at Sequel, the webinar solution for data-driven marketers. Kathleen, I'm so excited to have you on with us today.
Hey, Philip, it's great to see you again.
Fun fact, Kathleen interviewed me for her own podcast quite a few years ago, and it was such an awesome chat, and I have no doubt that today's will be even better.
Agreed.
Well, I'd love to kick it off with kind of an open-ended question, but can you tell me some things that you're really excited about right now?
Oh gosh. Yes, there's so many. I'm going to have to try to boil it down. I think one is, AI is absolutely top of my list. Marketers are approaching it in a lot of different ways. I am one that is really leaning into it. I really love it. It has made my job so much easier. We are moving at lightning speed at Sequel. We're currently in the middle of releasing 12 products in 12 days, and I couldn't do any of what I'm doing without AI. So I'm very excited about that, but I'm also excited about like the polar opposite, which is anything that is like extremely not AI. Things that are like hard to scale and do, that really build brands, that are moments of humanity, that are hard to recreate, that are creative. And so I just think we're living at a time when there's going to be, we're going to all have to learn how to use AI, right, to work better and smarter. But there's going to be a backlash amongst buyers, I think, who are going to crave human connection and engagement. And I am so here for it. I love that kind of marketing. And so I'm really excited about it and thinking about how that's going to manifest for us. So I would say those are probably the top 2 things for me.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned kind of the different camps of AI first folks, right? You have really 3 camps as it pertains to AI. One is I'm categorically opposed to it. There's no way in hell I'm ever going to use it. But then you have, the 2 camps that I think are most relevant are folks that are just so bullish on AI that they use it for absolutely everything from start to finish. It's just AI across the board. And then I think you fall into the camp that this is a very important tool. This is drastically changing the landscape of everything that we're doing. But at the same time, it's so important to just remember the human aspect. I think as marketers, we are ultimately selling to humans. We are ultimately telling stories that, are going to make humans pay attention. And so if you completely forego the human aspect, it just kind of, starts turning to AI slop, which is, I think, the thing that the best marketers are a bit afraid of. But, seeing as you are an AI first CMO, what does AI first really mean to you beyond just prompting ChatGPT?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I love that you use the word slop because I think, if I'm not wrong, that is Merriam-Webster's word of the year because it has become so prevalent. And I've definitely been guilty from time to time of maybe like over indexing a little bit on AI. And I've produced my share of slop in the past. So I'll be the first to admit to it. But, you live and you learn. And I think we're all on this journey together, figuring out what the right balance is. I don't know that I have it perfect yet, but I'll tell you where I land today. And that is that, interestingly, it was about a year ago that I think Shopify CEO Toby Lukey came out with a memo that was widely circulated where he was like, and it was specific to hiring, but he was saying, when we go to hire, the first question we're going to ask is, can AI do this? And if the answer is yes, we're not hiring a person. And it was very controversial at the time. But, and I was probably one of the people who was like, "Ooh, that feels kinda icky." But the more I've kind of, like, traveled along this journey, the more I've come to believe that that is actually the right way to approach it, which doesn't mean that I don't believe we should have people and that I'm, you know, all about eliminating people from the equation. I think what it just means is that like, we've gotta be smart about how we grow, and I would use this analogy of, like, over the years, we've had other technology that has introduced efficiency like this, not at the pace that AI has, but, we think back to computers and, like, things like Microsoft Office and word processing and spreadsheets and stuff like that, and, they're well, that introduced a lot of efficiencies that probably eliminated roles, but it just happened over a much longer period of time, so it wasn't as obvious. And do we, in the age of spreadsheets, do we still want people manually doing all of that work? No, we really don't. It's not smart to do that. But, and so I think to me today, the question is really like, when I think AI first, I think, can AI do that? But I would introduce one caveat to what Toby Lutke did, which is the second question is, should AI do that? And so AI can do a lot of things. It can write, it can do data analytics, it can ideate and help you with strategy. And there's just, it can create automations and workflows, it can do tasks. But you do have to ask yourself, should it do it? And so some examples are like right now I'm leaning very heavily into AI for product marketing, and I'm probably going to start to write a little bit more about this soon, but I kind of have to because we're doing, as I said, 12 product launches in 12 days. And it's just an insane pace. And we're a startup, so I don't have a huge team. I don't have a product marketer on my team. It's me and like one other marketer and a BDR and, the rest of the company, which is like the product team, the CS team, et cetera. So for us to do this, I have to use AI. That's the only way to make it happen. The question is like, to what extent should AI do it? And I think you alluded to this where you were like, there are some people who will just take whole cloth, like, this is something AI put out. I'm just going to copy it. I'm going to paste it and I'm going to go. I think, that product marketing is a great example of where you like can't do that. Like I've trained it really well. I've gotten pretty good at like training my custom GPTs and things. And yet it still does hallucinate and it will spit out fully baked product blogs that say like, this feature is available to all customers when I'm like, it's actually only available to enterprise customers. So like you have to be really careful and not just about the factual data things, but also that you're capturing an authentic human voice and tone and that your humanity shines through. And so I'm a big fan of like first drafts with AI and then have a human go in and like update it and make it reflect their opinion, their voice, their tone, their insights. So it's actually, to back up, my process with like generative AI is to bookend it. I start by brain dumping into a voice assistant and telling it what I think and giving it my point of view. I then use that to train the AI. The AI writes a draft, and then I go back and kind of massage it. So it done properly, the end result should be something that reflects my point of view because that was the starting point. So that's just an example of how I'm thinking about it. But I do like, some people may disagree with this, but I do think that there are roles that will be eliminated because of AI. And I think in many cases that's okay. But on a personal level, like I didn't want to be involved in going to a company where I had to fire people because of it. Like that doesn't feel right. And so that's part of why I went to a startup where I have this opportunity to build from scratch in an AI first way. So it's not about job elimination. It's about like when we hire, we're going to hire people where we really need humans, and we're going to have all of our humans working on the things that AI can't do so that they feel like their brains are being used for like the really strategic things, which I think is exciting. And it's like makes your job more fun when you're not doing the menial stuff. So anyway, that was a very long diatribe about how I'm thinking about it.
It makes perfect sense. You actually made a couple of really interesting points. I think I like to equate AI and automation tools to the same types of robotics and automation tools that were implemented in factories. You know, prior to robotics and automation, you had to have humans at every single station. The whole thing was wildly inefficient, maybe even, you know, a little bit different from marketing, but maybe even to some extent dangerous. And now you have these amazing technologies that make things move so much quicker, so much more efficiently. But I think as it pertains to marketing and growth, you can't make something that's shitty more efficient and expect great results, right? I think it is a tool to ultimately make things move more quickly, make things move more efficiently. And, you know, the keyword is right there, it's automation. But without that human creative input, without someone who has the wisdom, has the knowledge, has the experience to guide these tools and give them the guardrails, you're going to get blog posts that are completely inaccurate. You're going to get creatives that look super creepy and are completely skewed. And then on the beginning input side, obviously you need the creativity on the inputs. But then I think the sanity check at the very end, right? Like copy pasting something from an AI tool just creates this very dangerous situation, and even more so dangerous when these AI tools are starting to learn from the inputs that are generated from AI tools. And so it
Yeah.
becomes this self-reinforcing cycle, which is, I think, going to really differentiate the best marketers from ones that are just relying on this technology to guide everything that they do.
Totally. And I want to add one thing to something you said earlier, which was really interesting. And it was about like, there's a class of people who say, I'm never going to use AI. And I actually do think that there is a place for those people. But the way I would think of it is like, that is going to be more like a craft industry
Mm,
where it's like, for example, when you going back to your example of the factory floor, there's mass produced fashion, for example. And then there are like really boutiquey fashion brands where they're like, we're making jeans and we're hand dyeing them. And there's like four people in our, in our factory that are hand sewing the seams, and you're going to pay like $1,500 for that pair of jeans. And there's a market for that. There are people who are like, I want something that no machine has touched, right? And the same goes for, there's with art, there are people who will only paint and use more traditional mediums as opposed to using digital forms. And like, there will always be a space for that level of craft. And I think that's true in marketing and any other discipline. Like, there will be marketers who build their brand on like, hey, we use zero AI, and they carve out a niche for that. And I think that's great. I just think that for, like in any industry, the craft piece of the industry is going to be a small percentage of it because there's only a small percentage of buyer that puts a premium on that approach. Whereas the, like, I don't know what, 95% of the rest of companies, for mostly like economic reasons, are going to need to use these tools to scale. And it makes sense and it lets them reach a broader audience. So that's kind of how I think about it. Like, I would never say, hey, if you don't like AI, you're crazy or you're not going to succeed. I think if you don't like AI and you don't want to use it, lean really hard into that and make that your
mm.
brand and become like one of those craft creators and make it all about that. But if you're going to do it, you got to be all in, right? And you got to, it becomes almost like an art form versus the rest of us who are not choosing to go that path. It becomes about how do we use it smartly and be super efficient.
Yeah, and that's such a great point. I mean, it's a really good way to look at it. And I mean, we've seen entire platforms emerge from craft, right? If you look at Etsy, the whole point is that yes, you can go on Amazon, you can go on any of these platforms and buy stuff that's made in China, mass manufactured, or you can go on Etsy and you buy something that is handcrafted, that is made with love. And I do tend to agree with you. It depends on the buyer, right? If you look at somebody who enjoys fine dining. They go to the restaurant. They care that the chef is making every dish with love. They care about the ingredients. Or you can 100% just go to McDonald's and get, the same calories, but a very, very different quality of meal. And I think ultimately, like, it depends on the end user, right? What do they value? What do they care about? But And I see Ogilvy on advertising sitting behind you. So obviously, you are somebody who values the human input and human creativity. But I do think actually that there's room for AI technology to assist even in the craft industry. And as you were speaking, I had this thought of like, okay, I am somebody who, handcrafts clothing, and I have my sewing machine and I have all these cool fabrics that I source from everywhere, but I still have to answer customer service emails. I still have to print out shipping labels. I still need to do XYZ. Just the boring logistics of the business that actually have nothing to do. Maybe customer service is a bad example because I do think human touch is still important there. But just some of those things that are so radically inefficient that take away time from my core competencies and are not the things that make my business special. Perhaps there is some room for the technologies to coexist with the human craft, right?
Yeah, totally. And you mentioned Etsy, and that's even a great example because on Etsy, I would argue there are tons of products being sold that are not handcrafted. But what it is somebody will take a mass produced product and they'll add, put their stamp on it, whether it's like how they decorate it or what have you. And I think that's actually the closest analogy to what I'm talking about with AI, where it's like, you know, let's let AI do the part that doesn't need to be handcrafted. So, like on Etsy, it might be like a customized mug where the mug is produced by whatever, factory, but the design that you create on that mug perhaps is like 100% uniquely yours. And that's what somebody's buying it for. They don't care if the mug has come off of an assembly line. They just care that like the customization is on point. That's kind of like where I think that middle ground is with AI, that we're adding in a layer of
Hmm.
human insight and taste and judgment that AI can't create on its own, and we're letting AI do the piece that is very, like, replicable and mass market.
100% agreed. And we talked a bit about kind of how AI is restructuring teams and how we use it for work and how we use it to ultimately, output a more efficient, more productive end goal. I would love to get your thoughts on how you think AI is actually reshaping the other side of the equation, which is the customer journey.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing this both as marketers and the buyers that interact with us, but we're also feeling this because we are all buyers ourselves, right? Like live this duality, and so I think most of us have experimented with using AI as we've purchased things, and it ranges from people going directly into AI and asking it to, for what are the top 3 providers of X, to recently, for example, I planned a trip using ChatGPT and it gave me my destinations. It gave me the tour guide providers that I should reach out to, the exact experiences, the museums I should go to that I never would have discovered without it. And so that process of discovery is really now happening more so than ever on AI. Even like it's really even kind of starting to like supplant how we use search engines.
Mhm.
Um, I think search engines are still relevant, just to be clear. There's a lot of people out there who'll be like, oh, Google's not really relevant anymore. I don't think that's the case. I think, it's easy for me to say, like, oh, I planned my trip on AI. I don't know what percentage of people are doing that, but, it's the classic technology adoption curve. I think we're still seeing the innovators, the early adopters are the ones that are heavily leaning into AI for these things. But it's like any technology adoption curve, it's going to grow. And so the direction things are heading is that, in the past, buyers have gone to websites for really 2 reasons. One is to get educated on what is this product? How does it work? What does it cost? What are some use cases? Who else has bought it? And then the other reason is to engage. And that could be to request a demo, to speak to a salesperson, to attend an event, to use an interactive tool on the site. So I think it's becoming more and more clear to me that in the future, people are not going to have reasons to come to websites for education because AI is going to provide that. And it's going to draw from a lot of sources. Now, one of those sources will be your website. So your website still needs to have a lot of good information on it to train the AI, but I'll be able to go to whatever, pick your platform, Gemini, ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude, and I'll be able to get a lot of the information I got on a website, but arguably it could be better because it's drawing from multiple sources. It's doing my homework for me. And eventually my bot will go to your website to get educated on my behalf. And eventually it might also just purchase for me. I think we're already starting to see that. So the question then becomes like, well, how do we actually interact with buyers? Because we can't control what these platforms say about us. We can like try to through how we train them with our content, but ultimately it's some other algorithm that's going to decide what people see. And so in my mind, like as marketers, we've always said your website is the place on the internet that you like 100% own and have control over. So as a marketer, I always want people to come back to my website. I've invested a ton in building it and creating the content and delivering an experience that really feels like my brand. And so if that's true, if you believe what I just said, then education isn't going to be the thing that gets people there. I still need to put that educational content on my site, but they'll consume that offsite. So I need to figure out how to engage with my customer, my potential customer. And that does mean making sure that I have tools on the site that allow for that level of engagement. And there's a whole suite of different, providers out there that are emerging to help with this, like cool platforms like OneMind, which has digital
Mhm.
superhumans. We implemented one of these at the last company I was at, and it's like a person who's not a real person, but who can talk to you and interact verbally, who can pull up slides, who can show you a demo, but you just have a conversation with them in natural language. And that's a form of engagement. And if they can't answer it, you can program the digital superhuman to hand you off to an actual human. You have, things like what my company Sequel does, where we're a webinar platform, but what's different is we actually have you host your webinar on your domain. Great way to get people to come back to your website. If they wanna go to your webinar, they have to go to your website. And so, like, there's all these different ways that you can still get people to come if you're willing to build engaging experiences for them. And then once they're there, it's all about like, okay, now we've got them here. How do we keep them here, guide them through a journey, and get them to purchase? And so that's how I think it's changing is that, it's gonna start with experiences on the website, not education, whereas it used to start with education, and then once they were on your site, they'd be like, "Oh, maybe I'll check out these experiences." So, kind of flipping things.
Yeah, it's funny. You couple of super interesting points. You mentioned OneMind. My friend Marty is the CFO at OneMind, and I just hopped on a catch-up call with him, and he showed me the platform, and I was like, "Wow,
It's so
okay,
cool.
like, we are in a new era." And I love the point that you actually made about hosting webinars on your own website as opposed to taking them off platform to places like Zoom. There are so many things you can do on your website. You can first and foremost pixel everybody, right? You start building those audiences and you get people, into your funnels. But really, the amount of merchandising that you can do, I don't think there's ever been, that opportunity in some of the webinar platforms that I've personally used in my businesses. So yeah, I love like the sort of innovative approach. And then I think you said something that really I think about a lot, which is I constantly have to remind myself, and there's a really good foundational principle in marketing, which is self-reference criterion. I am probably not my target audience, right? So I really need to zone back into reality and understand that the world doesn't change as quickly as my habits do. And so even though I'm super excited about some of these opportunities and I think everything is getting flipped upside down when I see something new or I see some kind of innovation, it definitely takes some time to adapt as far as, the majority of the population. And so keeping that in mind has definitely been helpful to me and I think has helped me put on the gravity boots as opposed to taking them off like I like to to do sometimes and center myself back in reality. But I think, kind of zoning in on sequel, right? You guys are basically helping folks enhance and build their owned channels, right? Like their website and adding functionality to the website. How do you think owned channels are becoming increasingly more important to marketers as time goes on and as technology shifts?
Well, I'm glad that you phrase it as own channels because it doesn't have to just be your website, like you have a podcast, right? I think what modern marketing is all about, and it's marketing's always been about this, but I think we're just seeing it become more important, is share of attention, right? Like
Mhm.
the people that we're trying to get our messaging in front of have a lot of different things that they can choose to spend their time, their mental energy, their focus on. And it's not even just marketing, it's like everything in their lives. Our lives are overwhelming with information. And if we want to grab a share of attention, um, and if we want to do that in a way that's future proofed, we have to do that through an own channel because we've seen how platform algorithms change on a whim, how any day now I'm expecting OpenAI to start to announce that they're taking advertising, for example, and that's going to change things a little bit. So all of these other channels, whether it's AI, whether it's social media, what have you, search engines, they will always prioritize for themselves and solve for themselves, not for you. They'll solve for the user, but they'll solve for themselves in doing it. And so how you solve for your own needs is through your own channels. And ultimately what that needs to be about is about building an audience and engaging with that audience. And so I've always been a fan as a marketer of a media strategy, which is like how do you become a publisher and how do you build the phrase is owned audience. There's people who like take umbrage at that because they're like, you don't own your audience, they own themselves. Well, it's just a marketing phrase, right? It just means you own their contact information. They've given it to you of their own volition. If you have that and you have control over the medium of delivery, you have something really special that has value. That could be a newsletter that you're publishing that has a loyal readership. That could be a website that has traffic that keeps coming back month after month. There are a lot of different ways it can manifest, but I think as a marketer that it's really, really important for you to not be building your house on rented land, right? You want to build your house on land you own, and that's an investment that will bear fruit over the long term. So at Sequel, we have chosen to focus on like what happens on your website. We do have this vision that in the future, websites are going to need to be intelligent. And what we mean by that is they're going to have to be engaging and interactive, but not just for the sake of interaction. They're going to have to do it in a way that's contextually appropriate based on who the visitor is, what stage in the journey they're at, what they're
Mm.
interested in, and what they should be doing next. And so that's kind of like the suite of tools that we're working to build. And we started as a webinar platform, and webinars and virtual events are still really at the core of what we do because we have this belief that like, look, they're one of the few marketing tactics or channels that are equally impactful at every single stage of the funnel, top, middle, bottom. So they're great ways of getting engagement with potential buyers. And if you can, again, deliver it on your website, you've got an audience, right? All of a sudden, you have people who've given you their contact information. They've come to your site. You have them there. What are you going to do next? And so that what are you going to do next is, I think, the other piece of what we're looking really closely at and starting to build product around. How do you continue to engage with those buyers while they're on your site after they've been to your site? And how do you construct a really contextual buyer journey around what you know about them?
I love that. Vertical integration and depth is just so important, right? Once you have them, how do you hold their hand and guide them through the rest of the journey? I think it's becoming increasingly more important with, all these distractions that we as humans have on a daily basis. But aside from, own channels, which I do agree is just such a critical piece of infrastructure that if a company does not have strong owned channels and are not putting intensive effort and time into them, they should really evaluate, how they're operating and really refocus on making those important. But aside from building up strong owned channels, what do you see as some of the major opportunities in the next 1 to 3 years, let's say, in the world of marketing and growth?
I definitely think just to double down on what I just said, that building an audience is key. And I don't see a lot of brands actually doing this. I think that media play is a really exciting play. It's something that I had just started to build at Pavillion before I left. They have a media brand called Topline, and it's got a newsletter and a couple of podcasts, and they're building out a YouTube channel. And it's exciting to watch where that's going. So, like, that's something that I'm following closely. And it's similar to something I worked on years ago when I was at Impact. That's gonna build a large, loyal audience. And I think more brands need to be thinking about doing that sort of thing. Sequel's a much earlier stage company, but we have the kernel of it. We have something called Game Changers, which is our media brand, and we've got a show within that called CMO series. We have another show called Masterclass. And that's something we're gonna be investing heavily in next year and probably, like, widening the aperture to think about what are other ways that we can repurpose the content we're creating through these series to add more value to the people that are following it. So that media play, I think, is number 1, and that what's great about that is you can host that media on your own domain, but it also creates all the assets you need to capitalize on whatever the platform of the moment is. Like right now, I feel like YouTube is having a real moment. Like it's fueling a lot of traffic on and interest in search engines and or sorry, answer engines are pulling a lot of information from it. So if you're hosting media on your site, you can repurpose it and put it on YouTube. You can, use it to create content that can go onto Reddit or whatever other channel you think is gonna help you at the moment, but it has to start with your own content. So that's definitely number 1. Number 2, I just think this is the year of events. I mean, I've
Mhm.
spent the last 3 years when I was at Pavillion building out a ton of in-person events, and there's just so much interest in that. It is not as easy as it sounds, I will say, because the way people think about events has really evolved, and the demands that event goers are making of the events they choose to attend are significant. Like people don't want to just go to regular conferences anymore. They don't want to sit and see a PowerPoint presentation. They want things that are experiential, which funny enough is what I was saying about websites. Like it is becoming an experience economy where we all know we can get information easily. So, how are you going to entertain me? How are you going to create opportunities for me to interact with other humans in a way that is really qualitative and builds a relationship and gives me an experience that I'm going to remember and that's going to imprint on my mind and remind me of you and your brand? Like that's something that holds so much power. And I see a few pockets of companies doing it really well, but that I'm very excited for this coming year to experiment more with that for sequel and to like see what other marketers are doing with events and experiences generally. So those would be 2.
Yeah, for sure. And to double click on what you said about media, one brand that I'm really, really seeing just absolutely crush it is Andreessen Horowitz, A16Z. I mean, obviously have always been a very notable VC firm and they have a very strong brand and a strong reputation. But man, have they been so powerful with their media arm going to market with just amazing high quality production videos and rolling them out across all of the team members and just sequencing this media engine. And I've just watched in real time how powerful that can truly be. Whereas, before, I think to your point, right, it's the engagement economy, but I think it's also the attention economy when there is so much in terms of scale, right? AI content and just short form media and all of these things. How do you make sure that yours is the signal to the noise, right? Yours is basically cutting through all of the potential alternative ways that folks could be spending their time and their attention. So, yeah, I love that, and I would absolutely strongly encourage everybody in marketing to really think about what is that media strategy? How can I be a media first company and not just doing it for the sake of doing it, but truly doing it to entertain folks, to inform folks, and to, captively hold people's attention. And then, like, 100 thumbs up for what you said about in-person events. I think the world, and especially the business world, has experienced some really, really serious whiplash from, events were important, but then we were kind of getting bored of conferences to COVID, where that's just really not an option anymore. And then post COVID, everybody wants socialization. We as humans need the in person in order to fuel just our existence as a species, right? But I think what we can all agree on is that doing it the same way that we'd always been doing it is just no longer interesting, because there are so many alternatives and because, now I have just such a wide array of things I could be doing with my time. When I'm invited to an event, Immediately, the first answer in my head is no, and then the second the second thought that I have is, "Okay, well, who's gonna be there? What are we gonna be doing? Am I just gonna be sold to the whole time? Is this, a unique experience? Is this something that I'd rather just do on my own or with my friends or my family?" I'm starting to really pick in-person events apart, not for, the sort of fact that I'm going to an event, but for the value that I'm going to be getting out of it. And I think as much as I think in-person events are really making this huge comeback and are gonna be the crux of a lot of what we do as marketers, especially in the world of B2B, right, is getting folks together and providing an amazing experience and a ton of value for them. And then, of course, reinforcing the fact that, hey, there is an underlying product or service that is responsible for making all of this happen. But yeah, at the same time, I really do think that the barrier to entry or the bar for the quality of these events is really, going to be set very high. And so we really need to get creative and figure out what are those things that people either can't do for themselves or wouldn't do for themselves, or the people that they wouldn't be able to get into a room with otherwise, and figure out how we can orchestrate that in a way that gets people super excited.
Yeah, I want to double down on one thing you said, which is about the bar being raised. And I think
Mhm.
that's true across the board because with AI empowering us to do so many things and so many more things, AI will get us so far. And it's not raising the bar, it's allowing us to move faster and deliver at scale. So I do think that we're already seeing um a need and a demand for humans when we do work on something to do it exceptionally well. And I think we're
Mm.
seeing that in events. It's like not just any event, the best event. I think we're seeing it in content. There's a ton of content out there. And you mentioned A16Z. One of the reasons they're doing well is they're producing exceptionally great content. And there are some amazing content creators out there. One good example is Lenny Rachitsky from Lenny's podcast, who he is successful because he's creating exceptional content, right? And I think this is gonna be true of across the board, the things that humans work on, the bar will be raised for all of it, because if we agree that it is worth the time of a human being and not an AI, we will not be okay with settling for mediocre because that's what an AI can deliver, right? And so that has a lot of like, it's exciting, but at the same time, it has a lot of implications for our careers and how we think about work and the standards we hold ourselves to. Like, we have to hold ourselves and the people that report to us to really high standards because we're paying, essentially, we're investing in having people do things that an AI cannot. So we have to prove that the product that's coming out of that work is something that couldn't be replicated in any other way. And that's a high bar to meet, but I think for people who are ambitious, who are hungry, who are interested and curious, that is going to be a very exciting challenge.
Yeah, and I think that really reinforces the sentiment of, like, the age of the specialist is really starting to go away, and I think this is the age of the creatives. They used to say that ideas are a dime a dozen, and it's really the execution that matters, and I think that whole sentiment's been flipped on its head where it's, "No, now we need the best ideas, we need the most creativity, we need the things that can't be produced by a computer, and then we can have the computers and the machines, help us along and make that thing a reality super, super quickly, like you guys are running with your holiday campaign." I mean, there are so many benefits and so many potential opportunities as it pertains to just this radical technological shift. But I would love to hear if you have any fears or doubts about the new era that we're entering and, just generally like how you feel about uncertainty potentially in the AI era.
Lots of fears. Where do I start? I fear that I am getting worse as a writer because I am leaning a lot on AI to go quick, to go fast. And I, once upon a time, was a fantastic writer. It was one of my superpowers. I'm sure I still hold that talent inside of myself, but like any muscle that you don't exercise frequently, I think it's like atrophying a little bit. And I think that that's just probably symptomatic of something that's happening to a lot of us. Like, it's like, when you when I was in grade school, we had to handwrite everything because I'm old enough that computers weren't that widespread, which makes me sound like a total dinosaur. But I used to have like this lump on my finger from like holding the pencil but I could write really quickly. And now like my hand, I can't write that fast and it's out of shape for writing. Like the same thing happens with our brains. And I do worry about that a little bit. I worry a lot about like I have kids who are in college and what it's going to mean for their careers. I think like on the one hand there's exciting aspects, but it's also kind of scary. Like are the things they're studying still going to be careers in the future? What should they be learning to future proof themselves? I don't really know the answer. Those things are scary. And then I also think just like there's a liability that rests in the background of everything we do today if we're using AI that I think a lot of people aren't taking seriously. And I worry about, gosh, are there AI produced things that are coming out of our teams that we haven't looked really closely at that are going to expose us to liability, whether that's because the information is incorrect and then we have to honor it, like I talked about earlier, where it spits out the wrong pricing plan information. Um,
Yeah.
or if there's factual information that's incorrect, or if there's something that's a copyright infringement, like these are things that kind of stress me out. I think by nature, I'm like a rule follower. I like to operate within the bounds of legality and the rules. And it makes me a little nervous that I think with all this AI, it's very hard to tell when AI produces something, like, did it copy something else? Is this information real? Did it just make it up? And then you sort of wonder, like, by the time I've gone and checked all this, should I have just written it myself in the first place? Like, those are all, thoughts that I have. But, and I do worry in general for like employment in our world and in our country and particularly younger people just getting started because I do think there's this dynamic where those of us who've been around for a while who have a level of expertise who have seniority, we're going to be fine at least in the next 10 years or so. But how do you start your career if like the day-to-day things that you would have done 5 years ago starting out are precisely the things that AI can now do? How does someone get started? And there's like this chasm of the first 3 to 5 years of your career that could easily be replaced by AI. So it opens up this question of like, how do you go from I have no experience to I have enough experience that I've surpassed that chasm and I'm hireable and employable and specialized enough that somebody wants me for what I can do? I almost think we need to rethink the earlier stages of people's career development to try to figure that out because that's the question I don't think anybody's really answered.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And what I'm seeing a lot of right now is actually folks that would have entered the workforce and would have gone to some entry level job or, potentially internships. I actually love to see, and this is more on the positive and optimistic side. I love to see folks having the opportunity to build things that were just never, available to them before, right? So whether it's people creating content, content creation obviously is just such a huge category right now. Whether it's people building tools with vibe coding, starting businesses as solopreneurs, having the accessibility in order to be able to do that has just never existed at the level that it does right now. And I do think there's a pretty drastic shift in the world of, is that the right path? Is it, do we go into the workforce? And I know entrepreneurship has been, being encouraged for a long time since the days of Carnegie, but then became more prevalent when we also saw Mark Zuckerberg, out of college build Facebook. And, there was the whole startup era where everybody wanted to be an entrepreneur. But I think there were so many barriers to entry before that you had to have a whole team and you had to have funding and you had to have this and that. But I think now just the accessibility level is so high that maybe we do see the world transition from, okay, there are just a bunch of, companies with hundreds of employees to now every single employee that could have been an employee is now their own company, is now building their own product, is now creating their own value, and can actually facilitate and fulfill every aspect from building to scaling to everything that goes along with building a product. But yeah, to your point, it's definitely, there's a lot of uncertainty around that. And I don't think anybody really knows like what the right path is. But I guess, to get your perspective on as a marketer, if I was, kind of just starting out in my career or I was thinking about going into marketing, what are some of the things that you would tell me to pay attention to or get on top of as it pertains to the world of marketing today?
I think there's probably 2 things that I would focus on. One is actually going back to some of the classical teachings of marketing, which is one of
Mhm.
the reasons I have Ogilvy in the background. I think that there are some fundamental truths of marketing and that are grounded in human psychology that will never change, right? It's like how people think and feel, what scares us, what gets us excited. Like you need to understand at a very fundamental level those drivers. So I would start there. But then I would lean in super, super hard to AI and I would learn all the tools I possibly could. And I would build as many things as I could because I
Mm.
do think when people go to higher entry level people, what they're looking for today is somebody who has taste and judgment, and that I think a lot of that can come from learning the classical aspects of marketing. But they're looking for somebody who's also insatiably curious and who has what I like to call a high figure it out factor. So who's like, we know technology is going to change. So you want somebody on your team who's like, who just wants to figure it out, who wants to get in and be like, oh, this new tool just came out, or, you know, Gemini just released this new feature. Nano Banana just has this new thing. I am going to be the one to get in there and build stuff with it. And I'm going to make cool things. And like, if you can walk into a job interview today and be like, look at the stuff that I built. I built my website with AI. On it, there's an interactive chat that you can ask it anything about me and my resume. I've made this video about myself using like, Sora or whatever. All the images are from Nano Banana. I built this thing in Cursor that lives on the site. Like if somebody came to me with all that and understood the classical like truths of marketing, I would be all over that person as a candidate because that just proves to me like you will be successful wherever we drop you. And it doesn't mean your whole job needs to be about AI, but I think being able to show that you have leaned in and you have said like I see the future, I'm going to make it my business to know as much as I can about this and to learn by doing and prove through my actions that I'm capable, that is very, very meaningful.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, psychology, I think, is just the fundamental underpinning of everything that we do. We have channels, we have strategies, we have tactics, but I think psychology is really the glue that holds everything together. Why are we doing this the way we're doing this? How are we conveying our message? How are we packaging our offer? And so if you know the fundamentals of psychology, you have just so much power as it pertains to orchestrating that in marketing. And to your point about building, there's this concept of high agency individuals that I really love, and I try my best to really exemplify what it means to be a high agency individual. But it really is, in simpler terms, the figure it out person. It's not I can't do this because of X Y Z or oh man, like that is such a hard challenge. I'm worried about it. It's no, we're gonna figure this out, or actually, I'm gonna dive in, or maybe there's something new out there that I haven't heard about yet. Or actually, I have this fundamental belief. Here's all this new data that counteracts that belief. And so I am going to adjust my beliefs based on the new data that I'm getting. I think high agency has always been important, especially in the business world. And that's, I think the force behind some of the best entrepreneurs, some of the best marketers, some of the best leaders in the world of business. But I think it really needs to be something that applies to absolutely everybody because if you have high agency and you have the power of psychology behind you, you are an unstoppable force. And I totally agree with you that those are definitely some things to look out for, both as somebody on the hiring side, but also as somebody who is looking to get gainful employment at a great company and work with some really great folks. I have this like kind of a curveball question, but I love to ask it just because I think it's really interesting to get perspectives. If you can get one message in front of every single founder and marketer in the entire world, what would that message be?
Oh my goodness. That's a lot of pressure.
Told you it was a curveball.
One message about marketing?
Anything that you think is important to get in front of all these folks.
Goodness. I probably could come up with something much better if I had more time to ponder this, but I would say,
Sure.
I think that the future of growth is gonna be AI powered and human first, if that makes sense. It's like that
Mhm.
duality is the duality we need to master in the future, and so I think companies need to lean into it. I think marketers need to lean into it. You've gotta figure out how to leverage AI while still putting your humanity in front as the headlights of your brand.
And that in itself is just so powerful. Like, that's why I like to ask it as a curveball question, because I think it's the first thing that really comes to mind, and I think that is probably it's the intuitive, the instinctual, something that just resonates with you and holds so true, and yeah, I think absolutely spot on. That is definitely something that I think people are gonna wanna rewind and then listen to again and then incorporate on a daily basis, because the world really is shifting and we are all at the forefront of it.
Changing quickly, that's for sure.
Yes, indeed. Well, Kathleen, it's been an awesome conversation, and I'm sure that folks are going to reach out to me and ask, where can I hear more? Where can I, follow what Kathleen's working on? So if folks want to follow along your journey, where should they look?
You can learn more about me and connect with me on LinkedIn. Make sure to mention that you heard this podcast, or you can check out SQL at SQL.io, and I'll have lots of content on there as well.
Awesome. Well, folks, you heard it here. Kathleen, thank you so, so much for taking the time with us today. I'm so, so excited to get this out into the world, and I think folks are going to get a ton of value out of this.
Thank you for having me on, Philip.